I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the deserts bare, breathed the mountain air. Of travel, I've had my share, man. Not really. But to confirm the rumors about me from my college days, I do get around. My family traveled a lot during my time with them, primarily to Florida and back, but occasionally straying east or west to Niagara Falls or Mount Rushmore, respectively. My wife and I have made similar excursions, if not a bit further, to Boston and Key West. The furthest I've gone with family is to England and Scotland, but what I want to expand on in this story is the one long, strange trip I took on my own to Spain. Sort of. When I was in high school, every 4 years, members of the Spanish Club and the French Club had the option to take a 10-day guided trip to their club's respective namesake countries. To qualify for the option to go, you obviously had to be a member of the Spanish or French Club, have taken at least 2 courses in the appropriate language, and have parents willing to pay for the ticket. I was one of 6 students on the Spanish side who met that criteria in the year 2000, my junior year. Of course, this was not an unchaperoned excursion. Since it was sponsored by the school, we were escorted by the Spanish teacher and the school's principal, both of whom were fluent in La Lengua de Espana. Now, I want to stop here for a second and elaborate on a likely insignificant element of this tale. While on this trip, I wrote a daily diary in the form of a letter to my girlfriend at the time. Ideally, all of the following would be a rewritten version of that, since it was a first-hand, in-the-moment account of the experience. However, the original letters are buried somewhere in my friend Matthew's house in Ohio. The only other copy of it is on this floppy disk, which I have nothing I can use it in on a file format that is unknown to me. So the following is just what I can actually remember and is likely flawed, though hopefully only in minor ways, such as I'm confident everything happened, but I'm less sure of the timelines. So if for some reason you're somebody who was there and I get some detail wrong, I'm sorry. I tried. For some reason, I remember the airport in Columbus we left from and the flight itself, despite both being uneventful and in no way novel to previous experiences. But I have absolutely no memory of our arrival in Spain. I think some luggage was misplaced and caught up with us later, but otherwise my brain goes from listening to music on the plane to arriving in the lobby of the first hotel we stayed at. I'm pretty sure that first day was uneventful. I don't even recall which city it was, other than that it was on the coast. And I'm pretty sure I only remember that much because the 4 of us guys on the trip came across some Spanish women in bikinis and asked them to take our pictures so that we could then get another member of our party to take our picture with the bikini ladies. Also, at this first hotel, likely on the first day, I tried calamari for the first time at the hotel buffet, and it was fine, but was super gritty, like it had sand in it. Also, upon entering our room for the first time, I found a pubic hair between the pillows on the bed I chose. Thankfully, as our trip progressed, the quality of the hotels increased as well, a likely attempt to be sure we left the country with a favorable impression. A last event of significance related to this hotel came during one of the nights there. The 4 of us males all shared a room, while the 2 female students and both chaperones, who were also female, shared another. 4 teenage boys in a foreign land with no oversight is probably a common recipe for disaster. None of us were particularly wild or outgoing, so it was generally fine, but we did happen to notice an attractive woman hanging out on her balcony at the hotel across the alley, minding her own business, and so, of course, we needed to get her attention. We started with the obvious loud hello technique, and that proved successful. She didn't yell anything back, but she did give a wave and seemed to be paying attention to us. Since she was in a hotel, she didn't necessarily speak Spanish any more than we did, but she didn't seem to understand English either, or chose to pretend that she didn't. And so we resorted to stupid mime gags to keep her attention. This eventually culminated in me doing a striptease on the balcony of our hotel, which earned me shouts of encouragement, but Not from the woman across the way or even from my roommates, but from the street below where a crowd was gathered, waiting to be led into a bar or club. It's one thing to put on a show for a single stranger, but to then find yourself with an audience is something else entirely. I suddenly became super shy once again, grabbed my clothes, and went back into our room. Being a school-sponsored trip with school-related chaperones, it wasn't just an excuse to be idiots in another country. We did have a tour guide who led us on day trips to historical sites, a museum or two, and took us through some of the basic tourist districts of the areas we visited. One of the earliest sites I can remember us visiting was the tomb of former fascist dictator of Spain, Francisco Franco. The scale and architecture of the site was impressive, despite the despot it was dedicated to. I had stocked up on disposable cameras for this trip, and I think I used a whole roll at this one stop. However, inside the tomb we weren't allowed to use flash, and so none of those photos turned out, and a few that I took outside are almost all obscured by my finger over part of the lens. This would end up being the case for most of the photos I took on the trip. I took 5 or 6 rolls and only got about a dozen good pictures. Since our trip began in the southern portion of Spain, we also visited some extra countries by way of Gibraltar and Morocco. Gibraltar was mostly a brief stop to see the namesake rocks and get harassed by the native apes that will block traffic in order to get people to leave their cars and give them food. One of which climbed onto the back of my head and didn't feel like leaving despite my request. From there, we boarded a boat to cross the strait to visit Spanish Morocco. Morocco was a waking nightmare and should probably just be a separate video. We specifically visited the walled city of Tangier, which was the most chaotic, claustrophobic, anxiety-inducing horror show of a city I've ever had the displeasure of being trapped in. The streets were indistinguishable from alleys, and they were all filled with people. There was a garbage workers' strike going on, so trash was everywhere. None of the buildings our tour guide took us into looked like places we were supposed to be going into, but once inside, you suddenly discovered it's a restaurant, or a rug shop, or the Capitol building. Everything was a setup for someone to ask you for money. Every stop was planned to result in this. The rug shop in particular was harrowing because once your group stepped inside, the door was shut behind you and you're left inside this high-ceiling room filled with rugs and no windows and a crowd of people. You're then instructed to sit on the floor, and then some folks put on a show demonstrating how awesome their rugs are, which includes scimitars and fireballs. After that vaguely threatening display of power, you're then asked to peruse the selection and expected to buy one. I declined to do so, and the guy was most insistent that I do, even suggesting I purchase one for my girlfriend if I didn't want it. Thankfully, enough people did buy a rug, and so we were let back into the filth-ridden streets where beggar children followed us around for the day. It didn't stop once we got back onto the bus, though. Once fully boarded, but before the military came on to check our passports, another salesman wandered onto our bus to sell us a variety of trinkets, many of which appeared to be made of some sort of animal hide, probably monkey, but maybe human. My friend Ryan bought a creepy little drum that only he was entertained by. We did eventually make it back to Spain safely and headed off to our second hotel. I believe this was in Sevilla, and it happened to be at the time the city was having its Holy Week celebrations. These celebrations primarily consist of streets absolutely packed with people, and parades that somehow forge through them towards a big church. Naturally, our chaperone wanted us to experience this as an important aspect of Spanish culture. I made it about a block from our hotel in that crowd before I told someone I was not handling the crush of people very well and was returning to the hotel room to watch the parade on TV. I was successful at navigating my way back to the hotel alone, but once there I remembered one of the other guys had the key to our room. I didn't really want to sit in the tiny lobby for a couple of hours, so I decided to ask the clerk for another key to my room. Nobody at the desk spoke English, so this would be my first real-world test of my 3 courses in Spanish that I'd thus far taken. There was a problem, though. I had forgotten the word for key. So I had to figure out how to ask for a hotel room key without using the word for key. My makeshift solution was to request la cosa para la puerta, which is Spanish for the thing for the door. The poor hotel staff was having a hard time deciphering my poorly concocted and likely mispronounced message, but we did eventually find common ground somehow, and they let me into my room. Incidentally, llave is the Spanish word for key, as my disappointed Spanish teacher informed me upon her return. Some of you may be wondering, Terry, you're an extremely picky eater who rarely strays from super basic American food. What could you possibly have eaten while in a foreign country? Well, thankfully McDonald's is a global fast food chain, and their menu is number-based, so I never starved. Though there was one occasion where a beggar woman approached me in McDonald's and seemed to be asking for food. I held out my box of fries and said that she could have some of them, because I'm an idiot. She took the whole box and wandered off because she was not. Any time we ate as a group at a proper Spanish restaurant, I just ordered papas fritas, because French fries were a thing I knew the Spanish word for and knew tasted the same mostly everywhere. This has become the one thing my former principal remembers about me and our time together in Spain to this day. Also, I did manage to cut my thumb open at a restaurant while attempting to slice a pear with a butter knife. From Sevilla, we took an overnight train ride to Toledo. It was on the train ride that I had the best sleep on the whole trip, despite it being in a super narrow and cramped top bunk cot on a moving vehicle. Toledo itself was more a historical sightseeing portion of the trip. I mostly just remember the place we visited where we got to watch a sword being forged. It was then on to Madrid, where this was our final stop. While there, we were given a terrifying taxi ride to the Madrid equivalent of Times Square and let out to explore on our own for the day. For some reason, while on this trip, I was really into the idea of buying classical music CDs and spent most of my money on a 5-disc set at a random gift shop. So I spent the rest of the free day window shopping for boots and admiring the billboards for movies I didn't have enough time or money to go see. The night before we left to return to Ohio, the tour guide and our chaperones got us into one of the big discotheques in the area. The legal drinking age in Spain at the time was 16, so we all got drink tickets with our admission. I don't drink and didn't back then either. I also don't dance, but Europop dance music of the era was heavy on bass and beat, which I interpreted as being heavy music. So I went up to the second floor, found a little island that jutted out over the dance floor, and began headbanging like a maniac. Thus, I was spending my final night as I did my first, standing above a crowd, performing in a wildly inappropriate manner until I noticed I was attracting attention, and then slinking off to the shadows. I did meet a girl while in the club. She was with a different tour group of small-town teenagers on a school trip from somewhere in Pennsylvania. She asked me to buy her a drink, despite having had a few already and being 15. So I got to use my drink ticket for her. We then went out onto the actual dance floor and did high school-style slow dancing to what was probably a Spanish equivalent of Barbie Girl until my Spanish teacher forcefully dragged me away because it was well past time to leave and everybody else was on the bus. I like to think we shared a parting kiss, and she remembers that evening to this day, sometimes looking back and wondering, what happened to the weird goth kid I met in Spain? However, it's unlikely she remembers anything from that evening. And then it was over. We came back to America, and I got my photos developed and found the previously mentioned disappointing results. We got a page in the yearbook for the trip, though, plus, and this is a testament to how small my hometown truly is, the local paper wrote an article about us. Overall, I did have a really memorable time and would absolutely go back if the opportunity were to ever arise. Except for Morocco. I do not wish to ever return there.